I'm telling you this story today seated in my shed. It's one of the favourite places of mine on earth right now, which is good, seeing as I'm confined to it. It's a place of creativity for me and retreat. I thought I'd tell you today about one of my favourite countries on earth, Uganda, and my first visit there in the summer of 1990. Looking back now, I realise that firsts matter. Very often when we do something for the first time, we're creating a precedent for how we're going to continue doing things. We tend to be creatures of habit, don't we? And we set a rhythm for our lives. And I'm grateful now for the way God opened the door for me to go to Uganda and the kind of the precedent that set. It was the summer of 1990. Earlier that year, a woman had come and spoken in our church. Her name was Pat, and she had been travelling in Uganda, and she told some inspiring stories of the church in Uganda and what God was doing. And at that stage, Uganda was recovering from more than a decade of war and instability through the brutal regimes of Idi Amin and Milton Obote, and now Museveni had become president after several years of civil war and in 1986, and there'd been 4 years of peace and rebuilding. And I heard these stories and it was inspiring. And I spoke to Pat at the end of the meeting and I told her I was inspired by this. And she said, well, go and visit, go and encourage the believers there. So she wrote a letter of introduction, introducing me to some friends there. I talked to my friend Bob, and the two of us decided to go out there in the summer. Pat had written a small little pamphlet. I think it was called the Mud Red, Blood Red Road to Ginger, which was a dramatic title. The Mud Red Road. And Uganda really is mud red. It's a country of deep red soil, very fertile, one of the most fertile countries in Africa. It's on the equator. You can grow just about every conceivable kind of fruit and vegetable there. The food is beautiful, healthy, organic food. Many people live by farming still. They have their family plots of land and there are bananas everywhere. It's a beautiful, rich red soil. But also there had been a blood red soil. There had been many years of anguish and really difficult times. So we went to Uganda not totally knowing what to expect. We flew into Nairobi in Kenya, and we hitchhiked from Kenya across to Uganda. Interestingly, we got picked up by a guy wearing a dog collar, a vicar, in Kenya. He took us back to his home. We ended up staying 4 or 5 nights at his house, just becoming friends with this man. Lived in the highlands of Kenya, beautiful views all around. And then we carried on. We arrived in Uganda and arrived there to find that, to our surprise, the local pastors there were expecting Bible teachers, that this was the expectation that we were coming across. We were pastors, we were renowned speakers. Of course, we were none of these things. We were university students, and very quickly we found ourselves thrown into a full itinerary of, it was 6 weeks planned of speaking several times a day, day after day after day, in churches. They'd organise conferences. We weren't ready for this. We were these two naive university students. But in a sense, we were kind of up for it. I don't think that the folks there knew what they were letting themselves in for, and neither did we, to be honest. But it was an amazing time. We discovered very quickly that we were being treated like guests. We were being treated like dignitaries. We'd been put up in a house which was specially rented for us, the guest speakers. People were bringing food to us every day. We were being introduced as these guest speakers from England, and we felt frauds, to be honest. That this wasn't who we were. We'd been challenged before we came away, actually. And this is where the idea of firsts matter comes in. We'd been challenged before we come away. by when Jesus sent out the disciples in pairs, and it tells us that he sent them out 2 by 2, and he said, as you go, eat and drink whatever's set before you. Enter a house, say peace to the house. If you're received by a people of peace, stay there, don't move around, stay, eat and drink whatever they give you, and let your peace come and dwell on that place. Be a person of blessing, and pray for the sick, heal the sick. And that was in our mind, this idea of going out in twos and just being with people. So the idea that we were these visiting speakers, it didn't sit right. And I remember in the first week we were really struggling with this, and eventually we sat down with the pastor and we said, please, can we come and stay in your home? We don't want to stay here, this is costing you money. We want to be with you, we want to learn your language, we want to get to know your family. So he invited us back to his house. He lived in a rural area outside of the town. And as we got to know him and his wife, it was an amazing experience. They were called Nalongo and Salongo. Nalongo means the mother of twins. Salongo means the father of twins. Those were the names they were given when when twins were born. One of the things that I love about the culture in that part of East Africa is that often people are called by the names of their firstborn. So there was Mama Daudi, who was the mother of David. There was Mama Emmanuel, who was the mother of Emmanuel. And Nalongo, mother of twins. Salongo, father of twins. Interestingly, years later when we lived in Mozambique and for a number of years we didn't have children, we realised that we had acquired a name, Ndichauyo, Ndichauya, the mother of the one to come, which is a beautiful thought. But so we were staying with Nalongo and Salongo. We were getting to know them and the family. They lived a very challenging life. The water, where they collected water, was about 500 metres away down a steep hill. We used to walk down there with the kids, collecting water in jerry cans from the stream, carrying it back up to the house. They were cooking on an open fire. It was a basic kind of life. But as we lived with them, we saw in their lives such a sense of peace and contentment. And I'm not romanticising poverty by any means, but I saw in them, even though there was a lack of material possessions, there was a profound peace. There was a profound sense of knowing God, a deep spirituality, a deep passion for the Lord, and an ability to live in challenging situations with gratitude and to be generous. And they were amongst the most generous people I've ever spent time with. They gave so willingly and freely to us. They gave of their time. They spent hours cooking meals. And then we would sit in the evening after 4 hours of cooking and spend 2 hours eating and laughing and dancing together in their room by candlelight, hearing torrential rain falling on the corrugated iron roof and the rain coming through holes in the roof. And they lived a life like that, but there seemed to be something in them that was outside of that situation. And I came from a place of material plenty. I came from a place where there was materially no lack, but there was great spiritual lack. And I was in a place now where there was physically, materially less, but there was a wealth of relationship, a wealth of quality time, a wealth of the ability to listen, a wealth of faith. And I really saw that the truth in what Paul says, that God has chosen the poor to be rich in faith. And there was something of beauty in this. And as we spent time in their home learning the language, Ugandan, just enjoying being with people, sitting with them in the dirt, eating with them, eating whatever people gave and brought to us, I learnt the principle of being with people. I could see firsthand that there's something of when I'm willing to come and be with people where they are, in their place, in wherever that is, eating and drinking, whatever they're eating and drinking, not thinking, is this water clean? But receiving with gratitude what people bring to me. There's something that dignifies them. I remember after one service in a very rural church, this old woman walked up to me, and she was an old lady. She had these kind of gnarled arthritic hands, and she held out a basket as a gift. And I took the basket from her with both hands and said, "Oh, webalinyo, nyebo, webalinyo." And I looked in this basket, and it was full of ants. inch-long ants that she had spent hours catching in the night, the swarming ants that fly after the rains. And she'd caught this basket of ants, and she was coming to give me this basket of ants. And it was a sacrificial gift from an elderly woman who didn't have much, and yet she was generously giving. And so I received this basket of ants. And there was something so significant about then eating the ants and sharing the ants with the family and receiving this with gratitude. And the relationship that was developing, and the fondness and the appreciation for each other. I also realised at that time that I could speak, that I could share in churches. Fortunately, I came from a church background which was very informal, where people could get up and speak in church, where there was an informality and a sharing, and there was an openness. And so in when I was 18, 19, 20, I'd had opportunities to share in church. So it wasn't new. And also, I was literate. I'd grown up surrounded by Bible teaching, and I was in a place with rural, many people illiterate, very few Bibles, and so naturally I had more Bible knowledge just because of my privileged background. So I was able to teach, I was able to give and share. And so I did. I took the opportunities, but after a while, after doing this day in, day out, I was exhausted. I began to resent the fact that I was in this place, speaking in particular. I just wanted to enjoy being with people, playing football, running around, eating and drinking. And the speaking became difficult. And I remember one time, and I think it was the second service of the day, and it was in a different village, and I deliberately sat in the back row, hoping that the pastor would just kind of not notice I was there. But of course, that wasn't going to happen. So halfway through the service, and it was a long service, halfway through the service, he then said, "And now, from England, I'm going to invite up our brother Tim, to come and share the word." And I was sitting in the back row, and I was exhausted, and I felt nothing to say. I'd said everything I could possibly think of to say. I hadn't prepared a message, and I literally had a few seconds from sitting in my chair. I got up and I started walking down, and it wasn't a big church. I started walking down the aisle, and I'm thinking, oh no, what do I say? I don't want to do this. Why am I here? And in those split seconds, I started thinking, lots of other people have made excuses through the years. I thought of Jeremiah making the excuse, I'm too young. I thought of Moses making the excuse, I stutter. I thought of all these excuses of Gideon, I'm the least in my family. And before I'd reached the end of the aisle, I'd thought of 3 or 4 examples of people making excuses. And so that was my message. I stood there at the front, and I then shared for a long time about making excuses and being people of our word. And I realised as I was speaking to myself. I was convicted by my own message. And I learned something that day. I learned that I really do need to be prepared. Peter says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's within you. Preach in season and out of season. Fan into flame the gift of God. These are things that Paul says in his letters. And I realised that I needed to be ready. I needed to know that I was in a place that I could give if the opportunity came. But I also realised that when I am at my absolute limit, when I'm maxed out, when I have nothing more to give, probably then more than any other time, there's a deep well to draw on, and that God speaks through us. And Jesus said to the disciples, don't worry on that day what you're going to say. The Holy Spirit will give you something to say. And I realised that really is the truth. So I had this amazing 8 weeks with Bob travelling around East Africa. A privileged experience of falling in love with the country, of meeting people, of profound spirituality. Salongo, this brother, this pastor, had been in prison for 2 years for his faith during Obote's regime. He was now choosing to live in a rural part of Uganda so he could be a pastor in an unreached area. He was an evangelist. He travelled everywhere on foot and on bike, preaching everywhere. And I was staying with people like this, profoundly impacted by people who really knew God and who materially had little, but what they had they were sharing. And I learnt something really profound through that. I learnt that and particularly when I would be driving through places like this in a Land Rover, I realised that those wealthy things like Land Rovers set us apart. They kind of create a distance, and somehow all the time it's, how do I get away from this thing that distances me from the people that I'm around? How do I sit with people where they are? How do I sit around the fire with people and share my life with them? How do I eat and drink with people and enjoy common humanity and friendship with them? And that was something that I was beginning to learn in Uganda, and that was a very impacting first for me.